Hello, welcome to my Regalia deck profile. This is actually a bit of an early build, sort of a bit of a budget build in a sense because I'm still waiting for a few cards to arrive, so I don't have all the options right now. It's going to take a bit of a while until I have everything, but there's a few things I can probably talk about while going through this deck profile, but there will be some other videos as well to kind of complement this too later down the line. So this is actually I guess this is the closest thing to a D standard deck that I feel like playing because I've played a few other D decks, Bastion and Hex Orb Sorceress. Bastion was what I used in Springfest last year in France, and Hex Orb, I used that in I think like the odd BRO maybe. I ended up collecting that in SPs, but obviously Hex Orb has always been a bit of a weird one because they get some cool stuff, but the thing is it always ends up being a bit out of date. I think maybe that set D set 6, they got some pretty good stuff that actually feels a bit more modern for the time it came out, but I wasn't really playing much of the game in that format at that time. So due to that, I've mainly just been focused on V and Premium, but then Minerva Rising came out, D set 8, and that happened literally like while I was at Worlds. So obviously this is a retrain of an iconic, well, one of the cards that I basically have used the most in the game since playing it. So this boss is actually kind of goes back because my very first nationals I actually entered with this with the Limbrick version of this deck, and so it's got a very like kind of special place due to the sentimentality. And I remember like ages back, obviously I played Genesis when it first came out because I basically picked up BT10 and it had like multiple clans. It had Gold Paladins, which I was interested in, like the Blast Blade Liberator stuff. I thought the Liberators were cool. They had Jewel Knights, which is sort of like an extension of Royal Paladins, and I already had like the Royal Paladin trial deck, so that was a little bit interesting. They also had Genesis, which was also interesting too, because quite a few things really. The playstyles was definitely interesting. The whole like soul budgeting. I remember like when I first got into the game, one of the clans I was considering getting into was actually Dark Irregulars, but that never happened. And I got into deeper into the Oracle Think Tank rabbit hole. So I got Royal Paladin day one as a trial deck, but then next week I got the Oracle Think Tank trial deck, and then I ended up liking the Oracle Think Tank trial deck way more. So that's kind of like where things kind of started with BT10, and then BT11. I remember trying to get Fortuna. There's a guy I used to like waste so much time with, trying to like get Fortuna off him, and Fortuna obviously wasn't that great, but it was just I was still kind of early in the game, and I never kind of got around to Fortuna that quickly. But I did try some of the other bosses as well from that clan, and then BT14 came out, and then obviously this is when Minerva came out, obviously, and there was also the Ganslot stuff. There's more Jewel Knights. I also built into Eradicators as well back in BT10 too, but in the end I ended up focusing on this deck, and I kind of just dropped all the other ones because this deck was, well, in the Limbrick era, was so fun. And so here we are now, many years in the future. They retrain it in the D format, and it's actually kind of similar but also very different at the same time, because my round 1 of Nationals, my first ever round, I actually got grade stuck. I went against Silverthorn and I was on grade 0. We actually both said, oh yeah, I'm grade stuck on grade 0 and I'm grade stuck too, let's just hope we top deck something. My opponent top decks is grade 1, I didn't. At the time, for any of you newcomers here, we didn't have G assist at the time, so basically if you didn't draw the grade 1, that's it, you're just stuck at grade 0, and you had to try and hard draw into it. So drive check, draw phase, most of the time is where your draws came from. We didn't have that many cards that even drew in the early game either, like in the V series. So it was a very horrible time to be playing Vanguard, especially in competitive play, because you would just play these games and you just feel like the problem with Vanguard at the time was like there were so many games you played which just felt like they could just be ruined because your game gets robbed by horrible RNG. Obviously, it wasn't until like G era that things became a bit more tolerable. So the funny thing is that Nationals I played, the only 2 games I lost, so I lost round 1 to being grade stuck, but then the thing is after that I won like loads of games in a row, and then I got my second loss like late in the day which is what got me the knockout, because it was basically like a 2 losses you're out, which is super brutal and cutthroat considering you had to travel all the way to an event. You travel all the way to the event just to lose to something that's out of your control, which is basically bricking. So you get grade stuck. But the thing is the other way I lost, the other lose condition I had with this deck was not riding Minerva. Now, the D-era version is kind of funny because those two things, the hardest things, the things that make you lose the most in the old Minerva deck, are suddenly the easiest things to do in the D-series version. Because A, we have the ride deck, so you can never get grade stuck. And then B, you're always going to ride this card because it's in your ride deck. So basically the two things that cost me my wins at Nationals, my first ever Nationals, eliminated. So that was nice. But it's also probably part of the reason why back then a lot of people maybe jumped ship and left the game, because you just get fed up of losing to this kind of stuff, especially if you're like more into the competitive side as well. If you see like Vanguard more as just simply a card game and you're not actually like as interested in the units or the lore or any of that stuff, you're probably more likely to fall off, because I think for quite a period of time a lot of people that still stuck around with Vanguard were a bit more kind of invested in the franchise rather than actually just simply looking for a game to play. And if you're that audience, then obviously this game can start to kind of wear you out a bit. So we'll just go through a deck profile now. So basically we play the ride line. Obviously this ride line is actually quite decent because unlike a lot of the other ride lines, this doesn't actually specify riding a card over another card, which means even in premium these are good because you can just ride a Genesis card over and still activate the effect. So you play like the generic starter. I might even play base, because the only reason to even play, to be fair, the Genesis encounter one, the only one reason is just so that you can use Knight of Incision, or is it Excision? Knight of Excision, to basically add a same clan card as your Vanguard from drop zone to hand. So obviously if you're not playing it, then there's no reason to be forced to play. If you want to play SP starters and things, you can do that. Witcher Fox Melissa, this is actually really good. So Witcher Fox Melissa, besides the whole ride line ride over with both these cards both having the same skill, which is that if you ride over to next Genesis card, you can check top 5 and soul charge 2 out of 5 of them. Normally go after the witches, but also you do go after like any Angelicas that you see, and then in general, if you don't see any of those cards, you just try and put as many normal units as you can. Sometimes you might see too many triggers. You could possibly consider soul charging a trigger as well, just for the sake of having more soul. That's something to think about as well. I don't always do it, but sometimes I do. And more or less, this engine helps you to deck compress. So yeah, unlike Premium Regalia, we have 7 drive checks. This version of Regalia, you only have 3 drive checks. However, your trigger rate is actually much better than it is in Premium. You're more likely to hit triggers. So that's basically the generic part of the skill, but they each have a second skill as well, which are both similar. Just like in the old series. Funny thing is actually about these cards that in the old series, these didn't even come out alongside Minerva because they came out in different sets. I don't remember what this was in, but this is a generic grade 3 search in the old series, which wasn't used in the anime. So for some reason, they just seem to have picked, like, I guess the most popular cards to play in the competitive Vanguard rather than the actual proper kind of anime theme, whatever Masaki played in the anime. There was no Amno Hoakuri being used. You don't see any Gods of Trees Jupiter, no Ordain Owl. So it was a bit of a surprise to see this being the ride line. Maybe we will get like a proper exclusive ride line at some point. Maybe. I don't know. But for now, this is the ride line we have. But basically, unlike the original where they both have the exact same skill, where they just can blast one and call themselves back out when soul blasted, instead, this is still the same, except you have to have a Minerva Vanguard. So they've made it very xenophobic. The thing is, like, a lot of the support we've been getting lately has just been Regalia support. So yet again, even the encounter stuff is still Regalia support, so the rich get richer, and the rest of the poor Genesis cards stay poorer. And then we have, which is by the way the only reason why this card is literally dominating the clan so much now, because basically Fenrir, Astro Poets, Himiko, Fortuna, etc. Witches as well, especially witches, Amaruda. There's not really much kind of buzz going on around those cards at the moment. There hasn't been for a while. But then this card, it has the same restriction as well. But the thing is that you're forced to put in the back row. However, it's free. There's no can blast cost. So that makes it more manageable in this deck. Because now what you're doing is you're using this for your front row attacks, but then you can call this for your back row attacks during the battle phase, whenever you soul blast in battle. and in the process you can also soul charge 1. But there's another thing as well. Even though it says you can only call to back row, if you use Minerva's skill, which is Soul Blast 1, to look at the top of your deck and then place it on top or put it into Soul, what you can do is that if you do decide to put it in Soul or any of that sort, you can obviously Soul charge the next card in. But also, after you use that skill, because it's a main phase skill, you can basically call this the back row and then you can move to front row after that as well. So you can basically build your board with free plussing and have attackers. So it's very good, this deck, when you're starved from having a field, which is quite nice. Obviously, if you're starved from having a field and you have to call these naturally, then it just means you have less aggression, but you're still doing something which is quite decent. Obviously, you have to look out for soul. If the game drags on, you can actually run out of soul, because this deck doesn't actually have like a proper soul charge engine. It's really just the ride line that does most of the work for you at that point, and Melissa, of course, who can soul charge 1 as well when soul blasted. Other than that, there aren't really any soul charges. Oh, Drilling Angels soul charge 1, but it's all kind of small because you're soul blasting 3 every time, and there's obviously persona riding as well. And then lastly, Minerva. So I've explained the whole soul blast 1 check top card ability, which is quite nice for obviously looking for triggers, or also looking for key cards as well sometimes, or just finding something to soul charge as well. But then other than that, if your opponent's on grade 3 or greater, you can basically restand this by discarding a card from the Genesis clan. It's very easy to accidentally not have a Genesis in your hand, so be very careful of that. That is a misplay that comes up, where you may get a bit too carried with your combos, and then you just look at your hand and you're like, oh, I can't restand. So be careful with that, because in D format there aren't really that many Genesis cards, so you're not actually naturally doing the skill. If you play this in Premium, it's very, very, very difficult to accidentally shoot yourself and be punished for it, because almost everything you're going to play is a Genesis card in Premium. But obviously in D format, you've got all these triggers and everything, which are Cat Sanctuary, so that's another thing as well. But obviously by Soul Blasting 3, when you attack, you obviously get to call your witches as well to get more attacks. Also, she has another skill, which is that if you have a grade 3 Guardian Soul, your firearm gains 5k. Now, going back to Ride Line, where you can check top 5 to Soul Charge 2, basically the idea is that if you can get a grade 3 into your soul from their skills, then that's good, because it means you've now set up this to have the 5k. It gets a bit awkward sometimes, because if you end up calling Angelica but you don't have grade 3 in soul, you'll find yourself being forced to attack maybe with Angelica first, but then sometimes you don't even want to attack with Angelica first, because what might happen is that you might already have entirely face up damage, and Angelica's skills basically counter charge at the end of battle. So it's a bit awkward, and obviously Angelica, what she does is she can go to soul at the end of battle to then counter charge, and well, if there's nothing to counter charge, it feels like you just shoved in the soul for the sake of gaining the 5k to front row after that initial battle, but she won't have the 5k herself if you haven't put a grade 3 in the first place in your soul. So there's like a few kind of lines of play you have to kind of look out for there, like how you're setting up your powering up and everything as well, but also like how you're managing your counter blast resources and your enablers that can counter charge. That's something where you can end up finding missed opportunities if you're not careful. So that's basically the ride line, and obviously we'll get to the main deck now, which is, I don't need to explain this, serial numbers, and I got 1 triple rare. I'm still waiting for the 4th copy of the serial number. It's been stuck for quite a while. And then obviously that's for persona riding. Then we've got 4 copies of Angelica. I'm waiting on some of the other Angelicas as well, but I'm sorting out getting the 4th copy too in the FFR. But basically this is the card I was talking about. So her skills basically, at the end of battle she attacked, Soul Blast 1, give your Vanguard 5k until end of turn. I think it has to be Minerva actually. Yeah, it has to be Minerva Vanguard. So you give Minerva 5k until end of turn, and then end of battle you can basically oh sorry, that is still the end of battle, but after you Soul Blast 1 to give 5k, you can then move her to Soul, so it's like a separate cost. It's like a second part of the skill where you can pay another cost to continue on with the skill. So you basically move this to Soul, and then you counter charge 1. So you just be careful about your attack patterns if you want to have efficient counter blast management, because if all your damage is face up and you just attack with this, you're not counter charging anything, but you might find you still want to put this in your soul because you don't have a grade 3 in your soul and you might want to get more power. So there are a few contradictory lines of play you have to kind of look out for that can kind of take you by surprise if you're not paying attention. So just be aware of that as well. Another thing as well is that because this is actually a soul blasting rear guard, yes, it's a soul blast rear guard, they don't come out too often, especially Regalia. Regalia has never had a soul blasting rear guard. This is the first time we've actually got one. So basically this card, you can call Kalmar with it, or even Melissa to the back row at the end of the battle that you attacked. So this can help you get a 4th witch out if you were to Soul Blast 4 witches in one turn, because Minerva can only Soul Blast 3. This can Soul Blast the 4th for you, or you can just go for like extra extenders. You can kind of, it makes your attack plans a bit more fluid as well, because you can then determine do you want to Soul Blast Kalmar to get the extra attack in that instant, depending on whether or not your opponent guarded or whether it took damage. And if it took damage, is there a trigger? If there's a trigger, maybe you don't call Kalmar, because then the Kalmar might not be able to hit. So there are a few little things. The deck is quite fluid with how it tries to multi-attack, and so you might have to sometimes just change your strategy mid-battle. And then next, so this is kind of just a case of not having enough Kybraes yet. I might be putting Kybree to 4, but this is okay. The thing is with this card is it's very nice for filtering through your deck. However, sometimes your hands are just really bad, and when that happens, this card is a bit annoying, because you might find that you're just calling a trigger. In the worst case scenario, you can discard, but that's quite rare. To be fair, once you reach grade 3, the worst that can happen is you end up with 2 orders only in your hand, and you can't go anything else. But it's generally okay, this card. I mean, to be fair, it doesn't have Soul Blast cost. That's kind of good as well, but this is kind of good because of the whole +1, which is I think the main reason to consider playing it, because this deck doesn't really have a draw engine of its own. It's mostly a net 0 deck. The real pluses is just calling the witches out, and Angelica is also a neg 1. Then we have 3 more in the main deck of Kalmar, because obviously, as I mentioned, this card's so good. I mean, it's funny how this is a good ride line card, but also it's a very good main deck card, because obviously you're Soul Blasting the call as well. Another thing is that because the ride line is actually free, these cards become more playable. So this card I would never really play in Hex Orb Sorceress, because we've got tier square Sorceress in the deck, so it never made sense to play Counterblast Rearguards for the early game. However, or all the cards that work early game as well. However, cards like Kybree, which I'm going to get to as well next, Kybree in this, they actually become a bit better as well. Like, even if you look at, say for example, Hex Orb Sorceress deck, they have that new frame rare card. I can't remember her name now. Is it Octaray Sorceress? I think it's Octaray Sorceress. Basically, that card, it says your Vanguard has to be grade 3, but you don't really care that much anyway, because you probably were going to hold off until you rode to grade 3 in some games anyway. So it doesn't really feel like as big of a deal, unless your opponent damage rushes or crit sacks you or something, you go to 2 damage. Then suddenly you do care about having these Counterblast 1 costs in hand, but you're not going to probably build an entire deck around that scenario. Then 2 copies of Kybree, which may go to 4, especially when my other copies arrive. This guy, I really like this skill. It's got a Soul Blast 1 cost, which is both a plus and a downside, obviously, because you can run out Soul, but also the Soul Blast can help because you can call witches as well if you need to extend your field, for example, such as calling Melissa, so that you can have an extra attacker as well in the on the field. But it's very possible you might already end up with an attacker a lot of the times anyway in that spot, because this card searches top 3 to call something that's grade 2 or less. But if you don't see something that's a callable unit, then in that case you just add it to your hand, and I guess worst case it's probably an order or trigger or something. Then in that case you don't have an extra attacker, so then Melissa comes in handy. But obviously you can't anticipate that, so you're paying the cost when you first place it before you see what the top 3 is. So the thing with that is obviously you don't know if you're going to need Melissa or not, so you're just going to have to like accept you're calling Melissa in the main phase if you choose to go in that route, regardless of what you see in the top 3 as well. Next we have Drilling Angels. So actually this and Kybree, they both shuffle your deck, so these can drag out your turn duration because of pointless shuffling, basically, because you don't do reverse stacking in this deck. And so this card, you can basically look at you can basically take a card from your drop zone, a normal unit or trigger, basically no orders, so you can only do unit cards, and you move it to Soul. And then, by the way, that's another argument for playing Kybree over the order, by the way. And also the other argument is as well because it's the new Persona Ride order, which is another reason actually for that as well. But this card, you put the order into Soul, sorry, the unit into Soul, you check top 3, and then if you see a card with the same name, you can then call that card. Doesn't happen most of the time, but you can do some really sly things. So besides using it to put the witches in from drop to Soul, which is quite nice, or even just Soul Charger 1 in general, The other thing that's really funny about this is that you could like try and anticipate. Like I did a play at locals where I put the Angelica into Soul because I predicted that I had a high chance of seeing Angelica off the top of my deck, and because of that I found a countercharger in a game where I used up all my counterblasts, and then I managed to countercharge and then use Minerva to restand. So there are like out of the box plays you can do with this card occasionally that you might see an opportunity for. Don't like limit your thinking too much on witches and soul charging. Like consider as well, like, hey, is there a chance, like especially after a long game where your deck is getting small, is there a chance that you might see an important card? That's a rare thing that can come up that might actually win you the game out of nowhere. So he's quite nice. Also, this deck is quite good at early game rush because you've got Kybre obviously, and you've also got Drilling Angel, and these are cards you will often quite happily call a game. Obviously, sometimes you might just end up soul charging nothing of value. That's fine if it happens, because at least you still swung with an extra card, and it's probably better than keeping this in your hand as guard, because you'd rather guard the field in a lot of cases anyway. Then 4 copies of Applewood Cider. This is actually just inferior to the Vive series version in so many ways, for the most part. And this card can only bounce to hand if you have a Minerva Vanguard, or is it Regalia? Hold on. No, Minerva. So then the other skills, if you have a Regalia grade 3 in your soul, she gains 5 as well, which is basically no different to V series grade 1 because they have 10k shields anyway. So it's very similar to the grade 1, but obviously you can't go beyond that 10k shield, so you don't have that kind of crazy kind of, oh yeah, put a card from hand to soul and gain shield for every 3 in soul or something. There's none of that. Also, you can only bounce this by having the Minerva Vanguard. You can't actually bounce this by having any card on the field as well, but it has to boost as well, so bear that in mind. This card's very good because you can actually bounce this after boosting with it to do some pressure. Not only is it good to have hit and run cards that you bounce and draw back, but also it's good for meeting the cost of Minerva. We have to discard a Genesis card, so that's also a very good thing. Plus, if you draw this in the early game and you know your opponent's not playing like a field control deck, you can just go, well, more so important, like you know if they're not going to be riding into the field control card before you, because like let's just say you go first, most of the time you're fine either way, even if it's a field control deck. But if they're going first and they have like a grade 3 boss that nukes your field like Baron Magnus or something, then obviously you probably want to hold this in your hand, because you can't bounce this to hand until you've written grade 3 yourself. So that's another kind of thing to consider as well. Then 3 copies of Witch of Frogs and Melissa. So Witch of Frogs and Melissa, similar to Kalmar, obviously, just play more of these because it's a good way to extend yourself, also fill up the field. 1 of the Gratias Gridale, I don't know, I just call it the Cup. This card is just there to enable Persona Ride because this deck actually thrives on Persona Ride, but to be fair, it can play without Persona Ride quite well as well, so that's kind of nice. You've seen like decks like Hexorb where they've given them Touchless because the deck relied way too much on Persona Riding. This deck doesn't really auto lose if it can't Persona Ride. If it Persona Rides, it makes it a lot better, sure, but it's not unplayable just because of that. And then here we've got the Blitz Order. So this is kind of going to be good when Chrono Jet comes out. So when that happens, there'll be a lot of great falls, and you'll definitely need this to kind of help you in that format as well. Also good against like the odd Kyrie deck or so from time to time. And it actually works against, I think it works against Overlord, if I'm mistaken. So yeah, it does. You can guard your rear guard with it. So you can use this as well if they attack your rear guard. Overlord is one of the most played decks right now too. Then we've got 3 of the Perfect Guards, Aegis Mare, and then the Overtrigger as well for Ket Sanctuary. There is actually a video on Question Mayor's channel. Robin did a deck profile where he talks about the regular Overtrigger. That's actually a good choice as well. It's worth considering too. I like to just try this out for now. But obviously, yeah, the downside is that this card can make your attack pans kind of awkward because you might just look at your field and think, oh, I regret getting the Overtrigger now, especially after you've decided to attack. Let's just say you attacked with Minerva Restand. You attack with another rear guard before you decide to do Minerva for some reason, and then you do Minerva's attack, get the Overtrigger in your 1 drive check, and then you only have 1 rear with 1 drive. That's sort of like one of the reasons why Robin would suggest playing the generic Overtrigger instead. I think the generic Overtrigger might be better, but honestly, at the moment, I need to test this more and more as well before I draw my own conclusions. I just want to kind of experience it and see, like, how my games go basically. In Premium I haven't been using this card because, well, Force 2 and restanding rear guards with 100 millions is usually win, but in D obviously the deck works quite differently. Then here we have 4 of the Blade Feather Dragon crits. This is actually quite good at Minerva because the thing is that 2k power doesn't always make magic numbers. So with a 13k body that has an 8k booster, you're basically getting 21k. But like with Apple Witch and Witch of Frogs and Melissa, or more so Melissa, doesn't really matter about Apple Witch. If you're bouncing Apple Witch on your first attack with Vanguard to hand, it's quite efficient obviously because you're not negging yourself by calling over. But then Melissa, when you're using Melissa to call into the back row behind Minerva for the second attack, you're also swinging for the same number, basically. But with this card, you give Minerva 2k, and then Minerva becomes like a 15k as well. So 23k, obviously, base. Obviously, there's other power-ups that can happen, like her own skill giving 5k, or Angelic giving 5k, or Persona Rai giving 10k. But otherwise, yeah, this helps you get the extra stage of power, but it's also applying to 2 attacks as well, rather than just 1, because you've got Restander, which is different to, like, you know, recalling a unit. Like, calling a new unit just resets the attack. Then we've got 3 of the vanilla crits. Oh, sorry, no, there's another one here as well. I just don't own enough SPs of this, sadly, so I play the foil, the witch crit trigger. So it's a little bit incomplete. 3 copies of Pro Roby as well, the draw trigger. The draws are quite nice. Front triggers are a bit awkward, at least in theory. I haven't really tried fronts yet in this deck, but the idea of, like, I mean, quite often I've found that I'm keeping my rear guards in rest when I swing with Minerva. Not always, but quite a good amount of times. And if I'm going to reset my field, it just seems counterproductive to play fronts in this deck because it works against you. Now the heals I'm not actually that sure yet on. I'm just testing these for now. To be fair, this has hardly bitten me yet with the 10k shield value. Hardly. But it also helps. Apparently this works against the Dark States Overtrigger. That's a ruling I need to kind of get a little bit more confirmation, but players have been telling me that they think it works. So I've just gone with that assumption for now. And by that I mean, like, because Dark States has like an additional effect rather than being like a kind of trigger effect, if that makes sense. I believe that's how it works. I will look that up though. I wouldn't take my word on it because that is something I'm not 100% certain on. I'm just going off of word of mouth on this one for now. Because over-trigger rulings, they can get confusing, and sometimes I'm just going to forget the technicalities of it anyway. But if you're dealing with an over-triggered Dark States and this does happen to work, then obviously it's going to be very effective. Otherwise, I don't think there's actually that many double crits at the moment in the format, and Gravidia I don't think has been played as much. I'm not sure how Ever as a deck works because I haven't got any Ever players at locals that actually have been playing against me, so that's something I do need to find out about. So I don't know what decks are actually double crit that are roaming around right now. I know Chronojet is not one. Youth Buck is not either. So otherwise play a few of these 15k heals as well, just to be a bit safe. If you play Hex Orb, you don't even have to worry about it because you've got a card that literally adds fronts back to hand, so you always have good quality shields or even crits as well. But yeah, that's basically more or less it with the deck, with this Regalia deck. So yeah, tell me how you found it, or how you find the deck even, and yeah, I guess like any sort of playstyles you enjoy. A lot of decks right now are pretty generic and similar looking, but there is a variant I was going to look into and try out at some point. So yeah, until then, I will see you guys later. There will be some more videos as well to follow on from this profile, so until then, I will see you guys later.